At last we left off, it was the year 2000, and EA had just published 3 James Bond video games, the last to be released for the 5th generation of gaming systems. Heading into the 6th gen, EA would continue to release 007 games yearly, and all core titles would be released on the 3 major console platforms: the Nintendo GameCube, the Microsoft Xbox, and the Sony PlayStation 2. EA originally planned to release a port of The World Is Not Enough on the PlayStation 2 and PC, but some internal conflicts at the company started to interfere with development, and the port was ultimately scrapped. All the work done, however, did not go to waste, as assets from the project were used to create a new, original game, 007 Agent Under Fire. Developed in-house by EA Redwood Shore, who would later become Visceral Games, it was first released for the PlayStation 2 in November of 2001, then 4 months later on the GameCube and Xbox. The plot initially calls for Bond to infiltrate a botanical research firm known as Identicon, under suspicion that it's secretly a weapons smuggling front. From there, a conspiracy to clone and replace 8 of the world's leaders is revealed, involving an even bigger corporation, Malprave Industries. It's up to James Bond and CIA agent Zoe Nightshade to stop this sinister plot. Standing in their way and who serve as the game's main antagonists are Nigel Block, the head of Identicon, Adrian Malprave, the head of Malprave Industries and the mastermind behind it all, and Carla the Jackal, an assassin assigned to take out Bond. First thing you'll notice about Agent Under Fire is that 007 isn't modelled after any of the actors who portrayed him throughout the films. That also carries over to Q. Though looking at Bond now, I can't help but see a sterling resemblance to another secret agent. Gameplay wise, well, it's first and foremost a first person shooter, with some nifty gadgets thrown in to give it that Bond-esque feel. Some missions call for a stealthier, non-lethal approach, while others have you on rails, shooting anything that moves. There's also a few vehicle-based levels where you drive around in MI6 standard issue spy cars. Although all of these elements had been done before to varying degrees in other Bond games, this was the first time they were all compiled together in a single release, and this design template of sorts would become the standard for almost all future Bond games released by EA. A new feature Agent Under Fire added to the series was Bond moves. During the campaign, if you pulled off a classic Bond move, like blowing up a forklift's gas tank to take out some enemies, or sweet talk a sexy lady that catches you in the middle of a covert mission, the 007 logo would flash up on screen, so when you'd complete the level, it would add to your point score, giving you a gold, silver or bronze ranking, which in turn would unlock cool things like a golden gun that replaced your default pistol or unlimited missiles for your car. Throw in the multiplayer the series is known for, and the critics thought it was a pretty decent Bond game, albeit a little on the short side and didn't really put up much of a challenge. It sold almost 5 million copies all up, making it the second most successful Bond game of all time. With Agent Under Fire being a big commercial hit, a direct sequel was released the following year, Nightfire. The story this time round, Bond, who has Pierce Brosnan's likeness now, is sent to investigate the world's largest green industrialist, Raphael Drake, and his company, Phoenix International, who was supposed to be ridding the world of nuclear weapons and power plants, but through the course of the game, Bond finds that Drake is instead stockpiling the warheads in order to cause a nuclear holocaust and take control of all global corporations. Zoe Nightshade is back to help foil his plan, as well as a few new characters, Dominique Paradis, a mole inside Drake's company, and Australian Special Forces agent Alora McCall. They're up against Drake, his head of security Rook, and bodyguard Kiko. Nightfire was developed by Eurocom and Savage Entertainment. Eurocom, no stranger to the 007 game series at this point, worked on the first-person levels, while Savage worked on the vehicle ones. It seemed the development of Nightfire was focused less on big innovation, but more on gameplay refinement and locale diversity. There were a plethora of controller setups, many funnily enough named after Bond films. Missions ranged from underwater infiltrations to outer space skirmishes, and the multiplayer now had up to 6 bots that could be enabled and have their playstyles customized. In another first for the game series, Nightfire even featured its own original song. Which players could view right after the prologue mission, really giving it that Bond movie feel.
Nightfire.
Although still being a rather short game, that didn't stop it from getting mostly positive praise and selling millions of units. One last thing worth mentioning about Nightfire is there's a PC port of the game developed by a completely different team, Gearbox Software, and built from the ground up using a different engine. The story was basically the same, but the vehicle missions were absent, and overall the game is considered inferior to the console version. Though the multiplayer did support up to 12 bots and even had online play, another first for the series. Now also in 2002, the last Pierce Brosnan 007 film was released, Die Another Day, and of course it had a game based on it. 2 actually. They weren't released on consoles however, or handhelds or for the PC, but for mobile phones. Both games were published by Vodafone UK. The first was titled 007 Ice Racer, releasing in 2002 and developed by Infuso. It's based on the car chase scene from the film. Your goal is to destroy your opponent's car before you run out of gas or the timer reaches 0. And that's it. 007 Hover Chase followed it up a year later, developed this time by IOMO. It was, well, obviously based around the hover chase scene from Die Another Day. Your objective is to navigate your way through an endless minefield, avoiding mines, picking up power-ups, and taking out enemy hovercrafts. Yeah, they were simple, but what would you expect from early noughties mobile phone games? In 2004, James Bond 007 Everything or Nothing was released for home consoles. EA Redwood Shore was in charge of development for the most part, with EA Canada working on the vehicle-based levels. The first-person perspective was out, and a third-person perspective was in. For this game they really went all out. Not only did they use Pierce Brosnan's likeness for Bond, but for the first time ever, his voice was also lent to the character.
A stunning development.
They got Judi Dench to reprise her role as M, John Cleese as Q, as well as Richard Kuehl as Jaws. Some other big names whose voices and likenesses were added to new characters were Willem Dafoe, Heidi Klum, Shannon Elizabeth, and the Grammy Award-winning R&B singer Maya, who also sung the original theme song for the game. The plot was penned by screenwriter Bruce Furstein, who wrote the Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies, and co-wrote both Goldeneye and The World Is Not Enough. Everything or Nothing's story revolves around a nanobot technology that has fallen into the wrong hands, Nikolai Diavolos. These nanobots are able to eat through any kind of metal, bar platinum, and Diavolo plans to launch them all over the world, and then take it over with his platinum tank army. Bond is the only thing standing in his way, and the campaign is filled with maniacal villains, double agents, gorgeous women, and plenty of explosive set-piece action. Everything that defined the Pierce Brosnan era of Bond films. To really show off the third-person perspective, they added new melee and stealth mechanics, as well as an increased verticality to the missions, as 007 spends a lot of time rappelling up and down the scenery. The game also implemented a cover system. Bond could now lean up against a wall or duck behind objects on the ground to take cover from enemy fire, popping out to squeeze off a few rounds when it was safe. The lock-on targeting system also allowed for a bit of fine-tuning. This was the first Bond game to feature a co-op mode, exclusive online co-op if you owned the PS2 version. 2 players were able to shoot through their own set of missions that were completely separate to the single-player campaign. Overall, Everything or Nothing was received very well by critics and fans alike, and to this day, it's still widely considered to be the best third-person 007 game. This would be the last time the likeness of Pierce Brosnan was lent to the James Bond character in an official 007 video game. The next game to come out, Goldeneye Rogue Agent, was released later in 2004. Although sharing a similar title to the Nintendo 64 game and originally planned as a sequel, they have little in common. The game is set in an alternate timeline, one where many of the classic Bond villains are all active at once. The full lineup includes Dr. No, Goldfinger, Oddjob, Pussy Galore, Scaramanga, Blofeld, and Xenia Onatopp.
Don't die yet. I haven't kept my promise.
You don't actually play as Bond in this game though, but a fellow MI6 agent whose eye was shot out by Dr. No a few years prior. You've become too consumed with vengeance and aggression for MI6 to tolerate and are even responsible for James Bond's death. In a simulation, that is. So M fires you, Goldfinger recruits you, and your mission now is to take out Dr. No as he's declared war on Goldfinger. Scaramanga fits you with a golden cybernetic eye, and thus you become codename Goldeneye. Yes, the Goldeneye is actually a golden eye. Now the gameplay is a massive departure from other recent Bond games, even though it may initially look similar to the other first-person shooters. Developed by EA Los Angeles, who would later become Danger Close Games, there's no vehicle levels, no on-rails sections, and all the missions are extremely linear, so there's really no need for any exploration. There's no stealth needed either, it's an all-out action game. Although it tossed a lot of standard Bond game design choices out the window, it did throw in a few neat ideas. For one, that Goldeneye isn't just for show. It has 4 core functions that are added to it over time. Firstly, it lets you see enemies through walls. Second, it can hack machinery to your advantage or weapons so they malfunction. Third, it can generate a force field around you that absorbs bullets and increases your melee strength. And lastly, it can throw an opponent across the room, killing them instantly. Very handy in a pinch. Another new feature added was the ability to use an enemy as a human shield, and as well as that, Goldeneye was also able to dual wield any 2 of the smaller guns, creating many different weapon combinations for you to experiment with. A feature that was almost identical to a game released 2 weeks earlier. Maybe you've heard of it, Halo 2? It was also the first Bond game to implement a rebounding health bar, and it even featured online multiplayer. But alas, Goldeneye Rogue Agent did not review well upon release. Even though the story had a unique premise, the gameplay lacked personality and got repetitive. And seeing as though Halo 2 had come out 2 weeks before and basically did what it did but better, didn't help its cause. The planned sequel was scrapped, the multiplayer servers were shut down a mere 2 years later, and Goldeneye Rogue Agent was promptly forgotten. Thankfully, this was not the Bond game to see out the 6th generation of video games. In 2005, EA would surprise everyone, releasing a video game adaptation of the 1963 Bond film From Russia with Love. EA Redwood Shaw was back in the developer's seat, and they even got Sean Connery doing Bond's in-game voice.
A dry martini. Shaken, not stirred.
Obviously, From Russia with Love follows the movie fairly closely, though it understandably expands the story to lengthen the experience, adding elements from later Bond films, like the Aston Martin DB5 from Goldfinger and the jetpack from Thunderball. It went back to a third-person perspective and played very similarly to Everything or Nothing, just a little bit more streamlined now. For example, getting into a fistfight with an enemy was now just a matter of pressing the right button to knock them out, or instead of having to go through a mini menu, select your grappling hook, aim it at a higher ledge, and fire it manually. Now just a single tap of a button on the flashing area would alleviate all this tedium. One great new addition to the game was Bond could now upgrade his weapons and gadgets. Each level had hidden schematics for Bond to find, and with these research points, things like your gun's ammo capacity and fire rate could be improved, as well as body armor being able to take more damage. There wasn't any co-op this time around, as the multiplayer went back to the more standard deathmatch modes, albeit you weren't able to play with bots. From Russia with Love did garner moderately positive reviews. Most everyone was impressed with how faithfully the developers had captured the look of the 60s spy film. It wasn't amazing, but for a game adaptation of a movie over 40 years old, it was pretty damn good. This would turn out to be EA's last 007 game, as Activision would acquire the rights to Bond in the coming years. From 2001 to 2005, EA had a very admirable run of Bond games. Nothing quite as groundbreaking as the original Goldeneye, but even so they did the Bond franchise justice, arguably better than a certain 007 film that came out during those years. In 2006, the movie series was rebooted, and this was also true in a way for the game series. It was now Activision's turn to show gamers their vision of James Bond.